it's working. Yeah.
Well, I could have brought my other webcam.
Check one. No,
Is that ours, Dad?
no, that's
That was a low-key way of
What
him
am I
saying
calling it?
that's not good enough.
Oh, I don't even know what that is. I just have the like whatever the one.
That's just my little webcam that I use
Has
for
the
recording when I
Logitech
do my.
I know on my phone it'll work okay.
What am I doing?
Just go to the Vineyard YouTube and see if. Hey, 1, 2. Is that coming through? Check. 1, 2. Hello.
I don't know what the delay is.
Yeah, it might be delayed.
I just hear.
Yep.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Hi, everybody. Out on the street, in the parking lot. Anywhere, I don't know if are we broadcasting live yet at home? Hi, everyone. As you can see, there's plenty of socially distanced seating, so we will be starting in just a minute. Our restrooms are open with plenty of sanitizer and soap and wipes, and it's really great to see all your faces. So, yeah, if you want to find a seat, we'll be starting in just a few minutes. Yeah. Oh, also, there's plenty of seating over here behind Jared in our tech booth. Hi, Jared. So, yeah, feel free to fill all this in as well. Harper. Harper, come on. Here, will you get your sister and take over? Harper, go set it.
Oh, yes.
Thank you. It's just as well if you can. Because in worship, sure.
Well, good morning. Hi, welcome to the not at home version of the Ventura Vineyard service. And if you are watching at home this morning, we're thrilled to have you too, and hopefully we get to see your face in person soon as well. So this is kind of different. I forgot what it was like to stand here in front of like actual people instead of recording a video and going, try that again. So it's wonderful to see you all. Thank you for coming out. We've tried to make arrangements for everyone to feel as comfortable as possible. We do ask that you keep your masks on this morning, unless you are speaking with a microphone. So if anyone objects, then come up here and you can take your mask off and I'll hand you the mic. Hey, for those of you that have been with us before, which I think is most faces that I recognize, welcome back. It's wonderful to see you. If anyone is new, we're especially thrilled to have you. If you are watching this morning from home for the first time, welcome. Yeah, we've got some fantastic announcements this morning. We've got some music. So we're going to go ahead and get into it with one of the things that we appreciate the most here, which are the multiple members of our worship team. And this morning, that's Chris Gwaltney, Jenny Downing, and James Dorward. So welcome.
Hey. Oh, it's real good to see you. I got to tell you, doing those videos kind of sucks. Right? I mean, I'm glad we can do it. I'm glad we have that, but there's just nothing, there's no replacement, I feel like, for this. I'm glad for everybody joining us online. If you can't be here, we love you. We miss you. But yeah, we'll sing some songs together. I don't know if you're allowed to sing because of the mask thing, but I'll sing for you, and you can just live vicariously or something. Voice it thunders. Your voice it thunders. The oak starts twisting. The forest sounds with cedars breaking. The waters see you and start their writhing. From the depths a song is rising. Now it's rising from the ground. Holy, 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 holy Lord. The earth is yours and singing. Holy, 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 holy Lord. The earth is yours. Your voice it thunders, the ground is shaking, the mighty mountains now are trembling. Creation sees you and starts composing, the fields and trees they start rejoicing. Now it's rising from the ground. Now it's rising from the ground. Hear us crying, hear us crying. Holy, holy, holy Lord. The earth is yours and singing. Holy, 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 holy Lord. The earth is yours and sing. We sing. Holy, 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 holy Lord. The earth is yours. The earth is yours. The earth is yours.
Wow, that's nice to hear that live. This is normally the time in our service where we would take our offering. We are not going to be passing out baskets for the offering this morning, but we do have some envelopes, I believe, right over here on this table. So if you would like to physically give your offering, there are some envelopes, like I said, over there, so you can take advantage of that during or after the service. But if you would, go ahead and say a prayer with me for our offering. Father, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity to be together. Thank you for these faces. Thank you for this community. Father, thank you for those that may be joining us for the first time this morning. Father, your presence here is already felt very strongly, and we are so grateful for that. Father, take these offerings that we offer to you and use them to advance your kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen. So now we have a few announcements that we're going to just fire off, rapid fire. So I would like to start by handing it over to Ashley Gwaltney.
Hi, I'm just going to leave this on. It's easier. So just quick announcement. We do have a photo booth because it is Mother's Day. So to offer a chance for family photos, but it's not just for mothers, obviously. It's for anybody who wants a photo taken. So the way it's going to work is after the service, it's inside straight through. You'll see it and I'll be there. And I can either take it on your own phone so you have it and then you can then crop or edit whatever you want to do, or I can take it on my own and then send it to you. So that'll be after the service. We'll just, go one household at a time, basically. But it'll be inside. I'll be there waiting. Okay. And then I'm going to hand it off to Catherine for the next exciting announcement.
Hi, I have a quick Children's Ministries update. I've had the pleasure and just the awesome, it's just been great to work with Amanda Flores for the last over 10 years, I think, in Children's Ministries. But Amanda has just recently told us that she is going to be stepping away from the role of Children's Ministries Director. And we've been so fortunate to have her for these years. She's been a key part of our church. They'll remain a part of our church. But I just can't tell you all the ways she has influenced and helped our church grow in children's ministries, in retreats, in fun events like the Funny Raiser. So many ways she's probably touched your life and the way she's touched mine. So what I'm hoping is that after the service, on the table over there, are some just little 3x5 cards. And if you would just write a thank you or a note of appreciation to Amanda and put it in a little white bag, we'll see she gets it. And for our people who are online, or if you want to take a few more minutes to think about it, you can also send an email to contact@venturavineyard.org with your thoughts of appreciation and thank you for Amanda. Meanwhile, we're going to be looking for a new Children's Ministries Director. And Sarah Cameron, who's been part of Children's Ministries for also those many years, is working with me. We've created a position description. We're in the process of building a search team. Our teachers are being contacted about coming back. We're assessing what we still need in the classrooms, but we want to be ready with Children's Ministries up and running when we reopen. So if you're wondering, how can I help? Well, just come see me or Sarah and say what you might like to do or be in part of this process as we reopen. So thank you very much. Don't forget the cards over there, or you can send an email and we'll print it up and make sure she gets it. And I am now handing this off to Gini. Oh, you have a mic.
So, we promised you a little announcement today, and I have to say I'm a little nervous about it because, picking a name is difficult. If you've ever announced the name of a new baby or a new business, you know it. Because, as soon as you say, I'm going to name my baby Methuselah, everyone says, I sat next to a Methuselah in kindergarten, and he ate glue, and he poked me with his crayons. So, and I remember when we named our firstborn Melissa Joy, I thought it was a perfect name. And then my aunt called me and said, your second cousin is naming her daughter Melinda, and it's going to be really confusing. Now, both of them are well into their 40s, and they've, to my knowledge, never been in the same city before, but apparently it was still confusing. So, so much for her predictions. Well, it's really no easier picking a name for a church. And we asked you all to help us by submitting names, and many of you did, and we really appreciate it. Most of those names highlighted some aspect that is really important to us, and it's either who we are or who we're trying to be. The leadership team looked carefully at all the names submitted, and Dan Cameron put together a rating and process that was worthy of any gamer. And we discussed the pros and cons of each one. And I think, I didn't actually count, but there were between 12 and 15 names that were submitted. So we looked seriously at each one. We spent a lot of time talking about who we are as a church as well, as opposed to who we hope to be or who we wish we were. And the thought that kept coming to the forefront was this: we're a church where people can come to explore their faith, deconstruct and reconstruct their faith, embrace or wrestle with skepticism, ask questions, and begin to rebuild that faith. And we understand that answering these questions is not a simple thing, and sometimes we just have to sit in the mystery of it. In fact, it is that very quality that had attracted many people on our leadership team to be a part of us, and many of you sitting out here. So we wanted to select a name that reflected that. We looked not only at the names as they were submitted, but we also looked at the various pieces and parts of them and tried to get the feeling of what people were trying to say. And the name that continued to come up, that seemed to get the most support, was some variant of the word liminal. But the hesitation was, that's not a word that's widely known or used in the masses, or is it associated with church? But we saw that as both a good thing and a bad thing. The good part of it is that it invites conversation, we saw that as a very positive thing. It also lacks churchiness, which kind of fits us as well. The next step was to look at the top contenders and decide what would make them more palatable. And when we talked about liminal, we decided that adding the word church, so Liminal Church of Ventura, it fit right with us. That way there would be no question that yes, we are indeed a church. But we wanted to wrestle a little bit more to make it clear. And Catherine Anderson made a suggestion along the line that really helped us. And that was to consider adding a tagline. So the final decision was made, and if James was still up here, we'd have a drum roll. The new name of your church, my church, our church, is Liminal Church of Ventura, with a tagline of Exploring Faith, Embracing the Mystery. We hope you like it. Woohoo! So now that the cat is out of the bag, we begin the process of officially changing the name with the Secretary of State, the IRS, and the banking institutions. So for now, in terms of your giving, which I hope you do, you can still continue to make your offerings to Ventura Vineyard, and we'll let you know when everything is officially changed. We do want to thank all of you for your support and your helping to submit names. Trust me, they were all looked at very seriously. And whether yours was chosen or not, the concepts are important. And in an upcoming sermon series, we're going to be unpacking our mission, our vision, and our values. And I think you will find that the heart of what you were trying to get at in your name suggestions have made their way into our mission, vision, and values. They're a part of who we are, part of who we want to be, and it's all important. So for the very first time, good morning, Liminal Church of Ventura. Welcome to this place of exploring faith and embracing the mystery.
So now we have to figure out is what do you call someone that goes to liminal? Are we liminalers, liminalists? That'll be the next round of suggestions that we'll take, so feel free to chime in. I'm sure something will stick. Hey, just a quick survey, show of hands. How many of you are on a regular basis receiving our newsletter? Look at that. That's fantastic. On behalf of the leadership team, I would like to extend a special thank you to Ashley Gwaltney, who puts that together every week, as well as her team that I know includes Jen Herman and who else? And Jen Herman, that help to ensure they get those in your hands. So thank you for that. There's been a lot that goes on behind the scenes to keep this place going. So even though we haven't been able to meet in person, I hope you feel confident that the church is alive and well, and we are excited. We don't have a timeline yet exactly on how often or when we'll be able to do this more regularly, but it's coming. So stay tuned to that newsletter and our soon forthcoming Liminal website. For more information on that. So speaking of the newsletter, at the end of the service today, if you would see Becky Andrade over there. Hi, Becky. It's lovely to see you in person as well. That's got this week's newsletter on it. It has some information. We didn't want to pass it out before because it says the name of the church. So no spoilers. But now the cat's out of the bag, so see Becky for your newsletter afterwards. As a reminder, if you weren't here beforehand, our restrooms are open this morning right through here behind a brand new wall brought to you by Ben Downing and crew. So again, for those of you that have kept up with what's going on, you know there's all kinds of construction going on in there, so be careful if you use that, but the restrooms are available. And now I also would like to get a show of hands. Where are my blenders at? My blend kids? I see one over there. I see some around here. Yeah, back there. Some of them share my DNA. All right, blend kids. That means you guys hanging out in the back parking lot looking cool. Put your cigarettes out and get over here. Not really at home. Not really. They already put them out. But if you would like to go see Kelsey Owen, our new youth leader, and go that direction for the rest of the service, and if you're too young for blend yet, like those other ones, you can hang out with mom and dad. Okay, I think that's it. I don't think I'm forgetting anything. At this time, I would like to turn it back over to today's speaker, Catherine Anderson. I didn't mean to catch you off guard.
That's okay. Conveniently, someone left sunglasses up here. I might need them later. That was awesome. I know. Am I on? I do it right? Okay. So I knew today would be special. I didn't realize how emotional I would feel. And I'm probably going to have to signal someone to get me some Kleenex partway through the message. But to see even half your faces is just incredible. And I'm not going to linger there because I will start crying. Also, happy Mother's Day. I realize this is a great day for some and a very painful day for other people. But I hope that we each have persons in our lives who were nurturing and encouraging and compassionate, and that we can take the time to remember and thank them today. All right, I think I'm the penultimate speaker in this Why I Go to Church series. And I think, Wayne, are you next? Okay, Wayne is next and last, so we have that to look forward to. Why do I go to church? I found this to be a strangely complicated question for several reasons. I have huge gaps in my church-going life, and because the reason I go to church has changed over the years, the reason I stay at a church has also changed. I have thankfully changed over the years. I see God's Spirit at work in some of the reasons I've been here and not been here, and God's Spirit leading me in one direction or another, but I also see a lot of my own willfulness and stubbornness. One of the things I've really enjoyed a lot about this series is what I've learned so much more about my fellow teachers on the teaching team. I've resonated a lot with what each person has had to say, and it's been kind of wonderful, or I don't know, tapestry-like, to hear how much of our stories are very similar and yet how much of our stories are also very different. And there's just that theme, it seems like, whenever you talk to someone about how and why they became a Christian, their story is so unique to them and yet also so similar to everyone else's story, which is wonderful. So I wish I had two hands, so imagine the air quotes. I'm part of a long line of people who go to church. I brought some items that are a recent part of my church, my family's church history, and also Tom's family's church history. So it's a little show and tell. It's nothing important. You don't need to actually see it. Just for some reason I need to bring it. This is a book that was published in 1942. I'm not good with talking with this mic, Jared. I'm sorry for whatever weird sounds are coming. Okay. This is a book that was published in 1942. It's about Tom's great uncle, who was a Norwegian sailor turned pastor and evangelist. And it's a fascinating read, if a bit, never mind, I was going to say a gossipy word. It's a fascinating read about a time and place of church culture and church history. You can't see probably from where you are, but these are little tiny ivory elephants. I have another one. And this is an ebony elephant. My great aunt and uncle were missionaries in the French Cameroon in Africa, which is now the Cameroon. And they used to send back to their sister, my grandmother, all these like fun artifacts from Africa. And so as my mom and her cousins were growing up, and then as me and my cousins were growing up, we all got to play with all of these things that came from Africa. And at the same time we were playing, we got to hear about what it meant to be a missionary in that time and place. And if you do come up and look at these later, you'll see that every one of them is broken. The tusks are broken off, the tails are broken off, the trunks are broken off. And what's really amazing is there used to be about a series of 40 of each of them, and these are all that have survived over the years. And then the last thing for my show and tell is that this is the Bible my grandmother gave me when I went away to college. It was a bold move on her part. She was a very conventional Christian, and this is a paraphrase. It's the Living Bible. It must have just killed her to buy it, but I think she was really hoping this might resonate with me. All right, let me see. So, I kind of missed the podium too. Okay. So, yeah, I messed up here. Going to church. Oh, wait, all this to say that in my early years, I had no idea that there was a world where people did not go to church, let alone have their entire week centered around Bible studies, services, meetings, youth group, vacation Bible school. I grew up in this idyllic bubble where my entire social life was filled with church activities and church people. Almost every adult I interacted with was either a Sunday school teacher, a youth leader, a vacation Bible school person, a staff person, a choir member, a potluck supper arranger. I mean, the whole gamut. And if they weren't part of my church, the adults I interacted with, I just assumed they went to another church or temple, because my best friend was Eileen, and her family was just as busy at the synagogue as we were at the church. But going to church, of course, is not the same thing as having faith. You can spend a lifetime at church and still not be connected to God. The institution of church might be filling an emotional need or a social need, and you might be clueless that the life of faith arises from an encounter with Jesus. Or you might realize it does, but for some reason you don't feel you've had that encounter. And that was the part I was missing, and by the time I was a teenager, I knew it. Therefore, it was quite easy for me to walk away from church when I went to college. But I was very interested in faith because I had seen what faith looks like growing up. So in college, I took comparative religions classes. I studied Gandhi and his influences. I tried transcendental meditation. I took a year out of school to backpack across Europe. I looked into Buddhism. And right now, if there was a timeline graphic over my head, you would be counting it and going, oh, we're in the 1970s. This makes sense now. But I had two anchors during this time of searching. And one of the anchors, surprisingly, was this Bible. Because I would pick it up now and then and wonder about the faith that my grandmother had that was so real to her, and why it was so important that I had that same faith. And I wondered, too, about some of the other adults in my life growing up who also clearly had this easy, natural, ongoing relationship with Jesus. The other anchor in my life during this time was Tom. I met Tom when I was 17, and even though he was on his rock star trajectory, and I was on there's so much stuff I need to see and learn journey, we were always together even when we were apart. And the thing about Tom was he had faith. He just believed. I would argue with him sometimes, how can you? Why? This doesn't make sense. And he would always answer, I just do. He always had this unshakable faith. We got married when we were 22 and 23. And when our first child was born, all that weird church-going history just suddenly reasserted itself in me. we had to find a church. And my church history had been Presbyterian, so we visited the Presbyterian church in our town. No way. The pastor was dry, dull, no life. We tried other churches. We went to some for a month or two. And finally, about a year and a half later, we went back to the Presbyterian church. Same pastor, whole different experience. This guy knows God. This is where we should go. And we were at that church over 20 years. We dove in 100%, nothing we weren't part of. Kids programs, mission trips, music, leadership. It was a great church, multi-generational, plenty of resources, great teaching, a huge emphasis on education and learning. And suddenly the Bible was incredibly interesting to me. I wanted to know more. Now, don't get me wrong. There were people at that church, and so there was always some issue somewhere going on. But I am so grateful to that church and the foundation that it gave us, our family. And I say, in all honesty, to anyone who asks, that church helped raise our kids. And in that environment, I felt my own faith blossom. There are things that I felt and saw and knew and experienced that could only have been possible because of God. But about 20 years in, things in our family began to change. Tom was being asked to play in other churches that had more contemporary music than our slightly stodgy or very stodgy Presbyterian church had. And Tom has always connected to God through music. So Tom started to feel a pull away from our own church. And I was beginning to be uncomfortable with some things that I had long been just totally fine with. I had questions, but I was reluctant to ask them. And I started to feel out of step. Some of them, and many of them, I framed as theological questions, or questions about how theology was being used to maintain status quo in areas that I was questioning. I had some concerns about how we were doing mission work. But most of all, I was beginning to feel that I was expected to act and think like everyone else at that church, and that expectation was wearing me down. Now, I've been gone from that church a long time, and in hindsight, I don't think that church was as uniform as I perceived it to be. And in hindsight, I think that if I had been both braver and more humble, we would have been able to work our way through it. Because in truth, in the years since we left, that church has changed. It's changed a lot, a whole lot. And in that crazy, I bet you didn't see this coming method that God loves to work in, our middle son is the pastor of that church now. So, if part one of my spiritual journey was being a Christian legacy kid, and part two was the years I spent investigating other options, part three really would be the 20 wonderful years that we spent in the Presbyterian church. And that brings me to part four, which would be the most painful part. In my mind, this is a dark time in my life. During this time, for reasons I'll explain in a minute, I began questioning and doubting the goodness of God. Our oldest child had developed significant mental health and drug issues in college. Sometimes he was barely functioning, sometimes he was psychotic, sometimes he was suicidal. And he was 400 miles away at UC Davis, and because he was an adult, it was sometimes not easy and sometimes impossible for us to be in the loop or to know what was going on. Our son, this son, whose faith had been teetering even before his mental health became so fragile, he prayed for healing, and we prayed for healing, and our friends prayed for healing, and nothing changed. And there were multiple emergency hospitalizations, police visits, incredible amounts of medication and prescriptions and changes in prescriptions and therapy sessions, and us driving the 400 miles in the dead of night, to, be there and make sure everything was okay, and nothing changed. And to me, the answer seemed so easy. God, you can fix this. And the longer it went on, the angrier I got at God. And I know what I'm about to say next sounds ridiculous and immature and out of touch with what it means to trust God. But I felt like God owed me. After all, I had this great Christian heritage, and I'd been God's girl for the last 20 years. And I was convinced my son would believe in God if only God would heal him. Couldn't God see that this was a win-win for everyone? There's no downside in healing him right now. And what made things worse, and this will really lower your opinion of me, is that I was angry with Tom because he just kept leaning into God and finding comfort in worship music and playing in a bunch of different venues, including this one, and trusting God. I, on the other hand, needed someone to focus my anger on. So you can see it was a rough time in our marriage. So finally, I told myself I was done with God. I no longer believed. And I said I told Tom, I'll go through the outward motions of being at church for the sake of the younger kids. And in my really lousy logical thinking, I thought that wouldn't make things any weirder for the family than it already was. But me and God were done. And sometime during that season, we started coming here. First when it was the House of Praise, and then when it became a church. And we were actually kind of part of two churches for a while. And Tom was so ready to be here, and I wasn't quite ready, which is weird. I was ready to leave there, not ready to come here. Just must have been ready to just hang on to my misery for as long as possible. Tom loved the worship music here. He loved Bob Harper's teaching, and I was miserable. And apparently I loved being miserable. I think it was about a year after we started coming here when it was actually a church. And I was back at home taking a walk through the park, and I heard God say to me, "You still believe in me?" And I shot right back, "Nope, I don't." And I kept walking. And it took me a few more paces to realize I was having an argument with someone that I did not believe existed. And I just stopped, and I stood there under some pine trees on an asphalt road, and I was just utterly confused. What is happening? This might be the Kleenex time. And then for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace, and even more, this sense that God totally loved me, that he understood why I was so angry, and it didn't bother him a bit. It would be cool if I could say that when I got home, there was a message from my son saying that he was 100% back to normal. But no, it took several more years of him doing the hard work, the really difficult work of learning to live with mental illness. And we are so very proud of him. And no, he is still not interested in God at all. But what does this all have to do with why I go to church? Well, that's part 5, and this is what I call in my mind the other side. I'm out of that dark place. We've been a part of this church, I think, for about 18 years. Tom will tell you I'm no math whiz. I don't know how long it's been, but it feels like about 18 years. And let me tell you that this church was a safe place for me to unlearn who I thought God was. You can see from my story that I managed to maintain a child's view of God for many decades beyond its expiration date. That I also seem to have developed a very messed up theology of entitlement. But here I got to meet God again for the first time. In worship, in messages, in small groups, and most of all in each of you. Some of you were kind enough to speak truthfully to me about who I was. And that was painful, but also healing. I have never felt that I had to be a certain person or act a certain way or speak a particular Christian vocabulary to be part of this church. I go to this church because with your help, I have learned to, in the words of Rachel Held Evans, doubt well and be humble about what I don't know. I go to this church because it is willing, you are willing to change. It's willing to experiment and make mistakes, and together we are willing to experiment and make mistakes. I go to this church because I see the way so many of you use the gifts that God has given you. in traditional and in untraditional ways, as actors, writers, musicians, artists, teachers, and leaders, as the ones who take responsibility for our children and our youth, the ones who make sure chairs are set up, bills are paid, figure out how to have YouTube church and Zoom community, deliver the newsletter, make coffee, buy donuts, and frankly, just keep showing up. I believe there is a place of high honor in heaven for those who know the importance of showing up at church. This church matters to me, flaws and all, but even more importantly, the church, the capital C church, matters to me, flaws and all. The church exists because of Jesus. This church, the church. Jesus calls us as individuals. You've seen that in each of the stories you've heard in this series. But he calls us into community, a community where we commit to each other and to God, a community that's meant to reflect his character, a community that walks his character into the world. Recently I read that church is a collaborative work of theology, an enacted theology, a public theology, an embodied theology. And I understood that to mean that it's what we say and do together that illustrates what we truly believe. Church is where we talk about and learn about God, and where we discover how we are meant to live together, how we are meant to live in the world. Church is where we learn to love and be loved. Church is where we learn to forgive and be forgiven. And I know that is the most essential and most difficult part of a church community. It's the reason so many people leave. It's easy to love the idea of another person. It's a lot harder to love an actual person. I go to church because this church, and every church, is involved in an ongoing conversation with the past and the present so that we can influence the future. And in this conversation, we're striving to understand what it means to be the church today. And we recognize that the gift of the church to us is not for us, but so that we can be servants to the world. As someone wiser than I once said, the church is a community of hope that bears the scars of the world and is willing to walk toward the future that God intends. I'm so glad we decided to celebrate communion today. This sacrament empowers us to be the community of hope that bears the scars of the world and is willing to walk toward the future that God intends. And in a few minutes together, we're going to take the sacrament of communion, which means we're actually going to enact what it is we believe in. So if you do not yet have your communion elements, raise your hand and someone will bring them to you. Everybody's okay? All right. For those of you who are at home now or watching later, now is the time for you to get your communion elements and make sure they're handy. Worship and communion are two of the most vital aspects of what it means to be a worshiping community. So as I've learned recently, when we take communion, we act out or embody our theology. We're showing what our beliefs about God are. In communion, we are both acknowledging and proclaiming that the church, that's us guys, is the incarnation of Christ's body. We're acknowledging and proclaiming that we were designed to be in relationship with one another and with God. And we are acknowledging and proclaiming it's the redemptive work of the Father, Son, and Spirit that transforms and empowers us. Okay, so the hardest thing you're going to do this morning is try to unwrap these communion elements. There's a little, they just take off the top layer, and there's a little tiny wafer up there. And don't take it yet, because I want us to try to do this together. And this is going to be hard for me because there's the mic, so hold on about the clunk here. Yeah, I already messed up. Oh, good. All right. All right. So I'm going to start with the words of institution. The Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took a loaf of bread. I made a cut. There it is. He took a loaf of bread and he broke it. And he said, after he gave thanks, "This is my body that is broken for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Take and eat." In the same way, he took the cup also after supper. "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. Take and drink." It's so good to be together. And let's pray, and then the worship band will lead us in worship. Holy God, if there's a silver lining to this pandemic, it's how much we have learned that we need you and we need each other. I thank you for this morning. I thank you for the gift of your Son. I thank you for this church, Lord. Let us be worthy. No, Lord, you are the source of this church. And when you have crafted us to be the stones and the living tree, Lord, you are allowing us to be part of your redemptive work. Lord, help us to grow in maturity, to grow as a church, to embrace all of who you are. And Lord, to never forget the tremendous gift you have given us. Amen.
Sometimes every one of us feels like we'll never be healed. Sometimes every one of us aches like we'll never be saved. Sometimes when we've given up, let your healing come. When there's nothing left, let your healing come. Till we're rising up, let your healing come. Where you go, we will follow. Where you go, we will follow. It's your love that we adore. It's like a sea without a shore. We're lost in you. We're lost in you. It's your love that we adore. It's like a sea without a shore. We're